And this is looking forward out the Dutch door as we're about to go under Highway 69 there, just south of Kiowa, I believe is where it goes underneath. And shot inside the souvenir car with Jim Coker. And unfortunately, this was, not knowing at the time, this was the last shot I ever took close up of Lynn Nystrom, who was also one of the firemen and engineers for many years, but he passed away several months after the trip, unfortunately. Clint got the whole contingency from McAllister together for a group picture. So this was about, what, count them up, 22 8x10s. Now it's my turn to have fun. And this was the first time I've been up, you know, riding, not to belittle riding in the cab, but Grapevine, at least when they had steam, or Texas State or Austin, but it's just a different feel when you're in this proportionally larger a steam locomotive, and there's just so much room up there in the cab. It's just amazing. And then looking at everything, the sights and the sounds, Rick working the oil valve. And the gentleman running the engine this day, Steve Lee, was around, but he was hard to spot. He was always in a truck somewhere on his cell phone hiding out. This is Ed Dickens, who took Steve Lee's place as the manager of the steam operation, and then Garin, the pilot engineer, sitting right behind him. About the third and fourth cars back there, and we went into emergency, and Ed brought the whole thing to a nice, easy stop in about half a mile without sliding the wheels on the 844. So we were about 15 minutes late getting to Olive here, so they decided to hold us for 2 northbound trains. So I started to use the opportunity just to start to look at some details in the cab, such as the steam gauge and the water sight glass on the fireman's side.
It's like a coffee pot.
Yeah. Here was the first northbound that we met from the fireman's eye view. Now Ed was down on the ground, so I took it upon myself to occupy the engineer's seat for a minute and get that perspective. Everything from the old to the new, where he's got the diesel, he's got the rear end device indicator here, and just out of the picture is the MU device where he can control whatever diesel is coupled to the 844. So Ed just cracks the throttle. What he didn't see masked by his body is he cracked the throttle and then closed it. And when the engine started just barely moving, then he started to open the throttle again, bit by bit.
Copy that. We're on the south end of the over.
The fireman's watching the engineer and basing his actions off what's going on. Make those fine adjustments with both hands. Not a smooth ride by any means in that engine. 300 tons of locomotive moving at 60 miles an hour is impressive. Trackside ore in the cab.
Sealy, number 260C. This is in the late 70s. This was the last F unit that I saw leading a freight train. I did see this engine again coming onto Galveston Island, but not in the lead of the consist. Santa Fe had some interesting trains. Again, this is one of those favorite places there along Highway 36 between Rosenberg and Sealy. And that's the Duval Sulphur train that's on its way to Galveston. It used mid-train radio control power as well. And I can remember when I was still shooting black and white, when I had no money for slides, seeing this train come through Temple with actually Alco, big Alco 6-axle power in the middle of the train. By the time that picture was taken, it was upgraded SD-24s. This is Somerville. I like this shot. This is the Santa Fe in the late 70s. Yellow bonnet, big Santa Fe logos on the boxcars. This is a railroad that wanted to identify itself. So it was. They were everything that you've heard. Beautifully restored. These had just come back from Morrison-Knudsen the year before. Now we also call it Alexandria, Virginia, and that, of course, is the port for Washington, D.C. And this was Washington Union Station. Don't know if y'all remember this. It was for the bicentennial rebuilt, restored as the National Visitor Center. It was far away from everything. It wasn't finished. There was a huge hole in the floor in the middle of it, and it was a huge disaster that went tens and tens of millions of dollars over budget. But it looked good. And this is actually at Alexandria. This is the first time I saw one of the new, relatively new then, General Electric passenger engines and the Amfleet cars. And it just, reinforced again how much Amtrak changed the face of passenger railroading. At this time, however, Southern was still running their own trains. They were the largest railroad not to join Amtrak. And so I also caught the Crescent leaving Alexandria. And this being the bicentennial, they had refurbished the E units and put bicentennial plaques on them. And I seem to remember that they were, it was the signatories of the Declaration of Independence and their signatures, but I don't remember specifically.
But I grew up in a very small town in South Texas called Yorktown. I was born in 1956, and so by the time I was interested in trains was probably the very early 1960s prior to me entering kindergarten. My town was a small agricultural based town, had an approximation of about 2,500 people, and it was an agricultural town. The town was surrounded by farms and ranches, and most of the business in the town was mom and pop variety. There were a number of small stores, the bank, a post office, one operating cotton gin that I remember watching as a kid. We'd go down and watch them bale cotton. Several feed and supply stores, churches of various denominations, and a small single A-class public school system. And last but not least, the Southern Pacific Railroad. Before I started kindergarten, my days were generally spent riding around town with my great uncle in his pickup truck, as both my parents worked in the family restaurant business. Generally around 11 a.m., Monday through Saturday, the SP local usually arrived in town on its westward trip to Kennedy. The local announced its arrival in town with its air horn as it approached the first crossing on the eastern edge of town. This was my uncle's cue to point the old truck in the direction of the Yorktown Depot. And there's probably the Yorktown Depot at its finest, taken in the mid-1950s. And fortunately, many of you might recognize the name on the bottom of that slide, Joe McMillan. He grew up in Yorktown. He grew up in the 50s, where I grew up in the 60s and early 70s there. But Of course, Joe, if you know him, is an accomplished railroad photographer and started out preserving these historical images going back into the late 50s. And here he has a picture of the old Yorktown Depot almost in pristine condition, probably shot in the mid-1950s. As you'll see in some of the later pictures, it didn't look as well as it did here.